Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for this segment, we have Brian Stutland, Chief Investment Officer, Equity Armor Investments, for an update on Nasdaq-100 performance, volatility trends, and how investors can use EAVOL in their portfolios. I also want to touch on EV stocks a bit too, carrying on our theme from a couple weeks ago. Joe, it's great to see you not Joe, sorry about that. Brian, great to see you as always. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And Brian, let's kick it off with the tech sector. As we know, the Nasdaq-100 certainly heavily skewed to the tech sector. Looking at a note from LPL Financial, and they think from a fundamental perspective, technology continues to outperform. It's really what's been driving productivity, whether we're working from home, returning to the office, or a mixture of the two. I mean, even look at Nvidia, one of the key players within this space, enabling this hybrid life that we live right now, had great earnings.
Sure, yeah. We own Nvidia for clients. I own it myself too. And when I take a look at a name like that, fantastic earnings, stocks up nicely today. And really, it's been the chips. And we talked about this last week, is that the chips, everybody was worried about the supply glut, the shortages in the chip sector. Maybe that would affect some of their earnings, but certainly it hasn't. And it's actually provided a nice little tailwind for the rest of the Nasdaq and technology and the semiconductor. Really, that sector has really moved this market higher. When you look at the outperformance of Nasdaq versus, let's say, value stocks right now, they've done really well over the last month or so. And I think a lot of that's driven by the Nvidias of the world.
Right. And let's go back to EV for a moment here. We spoke about this a couple of weeks ago. And if you take a look at the valuations now versus what we saw only just, 10 trading days ago, they certainly have made quite the move. And who knows, Brian, those could be potential constituents in the Nasdaq-100 as the space continues to grow. But are you concerned at all about any of the levels that you see here?
Well, certainly when you take a look at names like Rivian, which had its IPO, obviously did fantastic. It's trading off some of its highs right now, and you start to worry a little bit about some of the valuations on that side of it. But one thing I look at here is, we've heard Tesla also, Elon Musk selling stock in there, and so you got to worry a little bit that the valuations are higher. But you do bring up a good point. Is some of these names, do they get added to the Nasdaq very shortly? A Rivian market cap of 100 billion or whatever or higher, does that deserve to be in there with some of these names? And if it does, that will have portfolio managers buying that want to own the Nasdaq 100. Obviously, I think it's the best to breed indexes out there. A little bias here, but because obviously I manage a fund that invests in the Nasdaq. But I do think that's where it's at. And so if names like Rivian get added in, does that then carry another leg higher? I do think people will take some profits here, but watch maybe near the end of the year if you get a little bump up in some of these EV names.
Yeah, no, it is interesting to watch. Outside of the EV names for now, let's talk about EAVOL and how you're using it within your portfolio. Because again, the Nasdaq-100 has quite a move. Looking at Apple up 19% on the year just this afternoon. Yeah. How would you incorporate EAVOL into a portfolio when you've had such a good run?
Well, when you take a look at it, I look at VolQ in the index that basically marks the volatility levels in the Nasdaq. And that has stabilized. It's not going down. Fear is not being driven lower, despite the Nasdaq trading at all-time highs. So, what that tells me, in fact, hedgers may be out there because VolQ, we've seen that tick up recently, not come back down below that 15 level we saw earlier. So I want to own volatility somehow in my portfolio as a hedge against the Nasdaq. And the way we do that is through our EAVOL and our volatility trading methodology. Is we trade VIX futures. We hold those systematically against the Nasdaq at about a 10% level of a portfolio. And for me, that provides a much better hedge. You look at an interest rates, normally people look to that as a hedge or offset to some sort of stock or de-risking. We think owning volatility actually is the way to de-risk against some risky assets out there. And like you mentioned, Nasdaq trading near highs, Apple moving to highs. You've got to be a little cautious here. There's definitely seems like there's hedgers out in the marketplace. So we're using the VIX futures to do that through our EAVOL trading.
All right, Brian, appreciate the insight as always. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.